can I thank him for coming to Croydon on Tuesday. Yesterday and the day before yesterday, my constituents finally got to see the kind of policing in terms of
that's like I had a funny head.
And robustness that they want to see every day. Can he reassure me and my constituents that we're not just going to see a temporary change in police tactics and visibility, but a permanent one?
I thank the honourable gentleman for what he did to introduce me to some of the shopkeepers and affected homeowners in his constituency, some of whom have been made homeless. I can give him that assurance because I think one of the things that has been demonstrated in the last few days, as I said, is the importance of surging police numbers quickly. There are 32,000 officers in the Met, and having just 3,000 on the streets on Monday on Sunday wasn't 6,000 on Monday, wasn't enough. That's why action was taken to increase it, and I'm sure lessons will be learned in that regard.
Mr. Geoffrey Donaldson. Mr. Speaker, the police service of Northern Ireland have been available and with resources to support the police in what they're doing here. Can I ask the Prime Minister, in the context of reviewing the actions of the police over the last few days, and that they involve the PSNI using their lengthy experience of riot control in advising the police about how to handle this situation in the future?
Well, of course, it's enormously helpful having Sir Hugh Ord as chairman of ACPO, who serves so well in Northern Ireland. It is an issue I raised myself in Cobra about accessing the expertise of the police service in Northern Ireland. I would just make the point that I think one of the issues that we needed to grip quickly was the fact that this was not a political protest, it was actually looting gangs, and so every case is different, and that's, I think, one of the difficulties the police service faced.
Mr. Edward Lee. One of the events that taken place when the authority of parents, of teachers, of police has been eroded so consistently for so many years, and hopefully the Prime Minister will reverse that process. But he himself has said again and again that civility and his accounts.
He's red.
And he's made tremendous progress in advancing the debate. But before the election, he said that as part of this, marriage was the key, and he would bring in a married person's tax allowance. It still hasn't happened. Will he now do it?
Well, as the honourable member knows, I think we should support families and marriage in every way we can. I think we should set a simple test for all government policies, which is this: is what we're about to do going to enhance responsibility, whether that is parental responsibility or the responsibility of the teacher in the school, the responsibility of the police officer on the streets? If it's going to enhance that responsibility, we should do it, and if it isn't, we shouldn't.
Mr. Elfyn Llwyd.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister realise that in times of economic downturn, acquisitive crime increases always? The difference this week was it was backed up by extreme violence and perpetrated by mobs. In that light, can I ask him to reconsider the cuts to police budgets? He will be seen not to be giving in to mob violence, but giving in to common sense.
I simply don't accept this determinism that when you get changes in the economy, there are automatic changes in the levels of criminality. And indeed, the figures actually over the last recession disprove that. We should be clear in this House that it is criminals that are responsible for crime. It is an individual act, and we should hold people responsible for those acts. But let me take this opportunity for paying tribute to the Welsh police officers, Welsh police forces that gave great support to police forces across England.
Mark Pritchard.
On the leadership he's shown on this issue and the initiatives that he's announced today. Is it not the case, though, that those local authorities that attempted to close down youth services should think again and perhaps consider shutting off and closing down some of the more lavish perks enjoyed by some local authority workers?
Well, the point I'd make to the honourable gentleman is that, look, every organisation, whether it is a local authority, whether it's central government, whether it's a police force, at a time when everyone is having to make budget reductions, has got to focus on the front end, on the things that matter most. We're doing that in central government, police forces are doing that too, and local authorities should do the same.
Diane Abbott.
I was on the streets of Hackney at the height of the rioting on Monday night, and I know how frightened people are and remain, and I believe the most important thing is to regain control of our streets. But on the question of the army, let me say this to this House. I'm well aware how attractive the further militarisation of this situation is to some members of this House. even to some of my own constituents. But let me say this, he will be aware that Sir Hugh Orde, who has ordered battering rams and ordered the use of water cannons in Northern Ireland, is against the use of these things in the current situation. And I say to this House, whether it's a popular thing to say or not, that the further militarisation of the situation we face will not help and may bring things to an even worse level.
Well, first of all, let me agree with what the Honourable Lady said. I think very powerfully about the fact this was criminality on the streets and about how frightened people were. I agree with Hugh Orde and others who say now is not the time to take these steps. The point I would make is government has a responsibility to ask about contingencies, to work out what next, what if it got worse. Those are responsibilities we take very seriously. And let's just take this opportunity to pay tribute to what the armed services do often do in our own country when it comes to floods and other emergencies. They play an incredible role and we should thank them for it.
Mr. Roger Gale. Mr. Speaker, would my right honourable friend agree that at a time like this, and facing the circumstances that we face, it really is a nonsense that magistrates' courts have to refer cases on to the Crown Court because their own sentencing powers are inadequate? Will you take immediate steps to give magistrates' courts the powers to deal with these cases so that the perpetrators can be where they belong, behind bars?
Well, as I said in my statement, we keep these sentencing powers under review. Magistrates' courts can sentence up to 6 months. They have been passing sentences. They've been doing that overnight and also referring cases to Crown Court. And I think it's vital we make sure there's enough Crown Court capacity to deal with these cases quickly.
Mr. Barry Shearman.
Speaker, can I beg the Prime Minister to change his mind about a commission of inquiry? This isn't going to go away. We could wish it to go away. This is a complex, changing social phenomenon that we've got to understand in order to combat it. If he announced this week a commission of inquiry, really at the roots of this, I'm a great supporter of select committees, as he knows, but it's not enough to leave it to a select committee inquiry. We need a national commission.
I think we should have more confidence in our select committees in this House to do this work. I think the Home Affairs Select Committee does an excellent job. So say I don't rule these things out for the future, but I think let us start with that. Sometimes commissions of inquiry have had to be ordered because committees of this House haven't been able to get to the information or the people. I don't see why that should be the case in this circumstance.
Ginny Willett.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Some cities have suffered hugely this week, while others have avoided violence and have managed to squash any potential trouble before it kicked off. When inquiries are established and when the Select Committee does its work, will the Prime Minister ensure that we learn lessons not only from those areas where the, violence was kicked off, but from cities like Cardiff and Sheffield, where there wasn't any trouble, and maybe we can learn lessons from what went right in those areas?
I think she's absolutely right, and any inquiry should certainly do that.
Malcolm Wicks.
Prime Minister, may I too thank you for visiting Croydon earlier in the week, where you met our decent citizens who had become victims, had seen their buildings and businesses burned down, had seen their offices and shops trashed. The people in that Croydon war zone, because that's what it was, were making the plea, where were the police? For hour after hour after hour, people were free to pillage and loot with no uniformed officers around. May I ask the Prime Minister, now this is not partisan, may I ask the Prime Minister, in fact on behalf of the people I met in the last 2 days, distraught and sad people, the people of Croydon North who have been victims, I would ask the Prime Minister, may I plead with the Prime Minister on behalf of my constituents to think again about police numbers. Because the people of Croydon, the people of London, want more police in London and not fewer. Fewer would be precisely the wrong policy at precisely the wrong time for our society.
With the right honourable gentleman, the time I spent in Croydon was incredibly powerful to hear about the immense frustration and the anger that those shopkeepers and those householders and tenants felt. But I would say this to him, the problem was that the police weren't on the streets. The problem wasn't about police budgets in 4 years' time. The problem was about the availability of the police right now. There are 32,000 officers in the Met. We needed to get more onto the streets more quickly and more of them to Croydon. It's about now. It's not about the budgets of the future.
Mr. Ian Stewart.
Mr. Speaker, I very much welcome the comments about the role of social media. As part of that, can I urge you to look at what might be called the internet equivalent of calls 999 calls?
it would seem that the police have had to waste considerable time dealing with false and malicious rumours about mob activity, and the law and penalties must be fully up to date with it.
I think the honourable gentleman makes a very good point. I mean, just as the police have been using technology more effectively, so the criminals are now using technology more effectively. There are an awful lot of hoaxes and false trails that were laid on Twitter and BlackBerry Messenger and all the rest of it. And I think we need a major piece of work to make sure the police have got all of the electronic capabilities that they need to hunt down and beat the criminal.
Sir Andrew Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Prime Minister say what measures he has in mind to strengthen families and, in particular, parental responsibility, which so many members of the public rightly think is a big factor in all of this?
Well, let me just give him one area where already we've made progress, but I want to see further progress, and that is the issue of discipline in schools. We've got to make sure that schools are able to confiscate things off children and are able to exclude children without being overruled by appeals panels. All of those things add to responsibility. In terms of families, it is making sure that every single tax and benefit that we have is pro-family, is pro-commitment, is pro-fathers that stick around. Part of the problem is the fathers have left too many of these communities, and that's why young people look towards the gang. Colin Burns.
The Prime Minister has referred twice in the last 24 hours to phony concerns about human rights. He will be aware of the many letters that we all receive about people who are dismayed by decisions taken that seem to laugh at our values and beliefs in this country. Can I suggest to him that if he is serious about wanting to build the responsible society, that will be much more easily built if we remove the invidious Human Rights Act from legislation?
The point I was specifically making was the concern that is often expressed and was expressed to me over the last couple of days was whether pictures could be published, wanted photographs as it were, under the Human Rights Act. And I wanted specifically to send a message to police forces and local authorities they should go ahead and do that. On the Human Rights Act more generally, he knows that we have plans to reform it at source at the ECHR.
Mr. Richard Burton. To Birmingham and the West Midlands, can I add my tribute to the work of the police, the emergency services, the local authority workers, but also the active citizenship shown by those broom brigades and the profound dignity of Tariq Jahan last night. Could I just say to the Prime Minister this, though, and ask him this question? Could he look again at the figures he was mentioning around the police budgets? Because he mentioned 6%. And if you look at metropolitan areas, the cuts amount to a lot more than that because of the way the formulae work. Will he look again at that? Because I think he may be operating on the basis of duff figures.